All right. All right, here we go. I had some sound issues, right? I know somebody's going to come down in the chat and remind me and say, hey, you got some sound issues, but I think we have them fixed right now. This is why it's always good to do a mic check. This is why it's always good to do a mic check. All right, listen, audit and fraud, friends and family. Are we too focused on compliance? Are we too focused on compliance? Don't get me wrong. I know compliance is important, but is it everything? In this episode of Audit Bites, we're going to tackle a tough question. Has internal audit become so obsessed with checking the boxes that it is missing the bigger picture? While we're busy ensuring policies are being followed, are we overlooking opportunities to drive real business impact? So today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about why compliance matters, but it's not the whole story. We're also going to talk about how auditors can add value beyond regulatory checks. Then we're going to talk about the risk of being seen as a barrier instead of a business partner. And we're also going to touch on some strategies for shifting from compliance cop to strategic advisor. Look, it's time to rethink the role of auditing. There are a lot of great auditors out there who have already rethought it and who are already doing some of the things that we need to all be doing. So that's what we're going to cover today. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to Audit Bites, the podcast that helps auditors become awesome. Join us for bite-sized info and education to excel in your auditing career.
All right, audit and fraud, friends and family. My man Clarence is here. Clarence said I can't hear anything. Clarence, hopefully we now have the sound issue fixed. My man Shafundu. How you doing, man? You know what? We need to catch up, Shafundu. I got some things I want to run by you, a couple things I want to ask you about. So we'll see if we can catch up at some point in time in the near future. So you guys heard the title of the show. Is internal audit too focused on compliance and not enough about business strategy? Because look, let's be honest for a second. When was the last time your CEO said, hey, before we roll out this game-changing initiative, let's check with internal audit first? I mean, when's the last time that ever happened? Yeah, I'll wait. I'll wait. Look, I get it. Compliance is important. It keeps the company in check. It prevents lawsuits. But what if I told you that in our obsession with compliance, we might be missing out on the bigger picture? If you work in an audit department and you rarely get involved in strategy meetings, then something is wrong. If you rarely get involved in strategy meetings, drop a thumbs down into the chat for me so I'll know. If you are regularly invited into those conversations, give me a thumbs up. I just want to see where we stand. I just want to see where we stand. I'm just curious to see where we stand because today, in episode number 72 of Audit Bites, we're going to talk about, is internal audit too focused on compliance and not enough on business strategy? And what would any episode of Audit Bites be without story time? So, okay, let me take you back several years to one of my most frustrating but eye-opening audit experiences ever. I was working for a mid-sized company and they were growing pretty fast, opening new locations, rolling out new services, but audit. Oh boy, we were not a part of that. Nope, not at all. We were stuck in the compliance bubble. Now, let me tell you what happened. One day, I was in the cafeteria minding my own business, just trying to get me a drink of water when one of the senior executives, let's just call him Chris. Chris walks over to me. Now, Chris was the kind of guy who only talked to audit when there was a problem. And sure enough, he hit me with it. He said, hey, listen, Rob, I've got a question for you. I knew it was coming, so I kind of gave him the look. You know, the look. He said, "Do you guys ever actually help fix anything, or do you just point out problems?" Oof. Now that one kind of stung, right? Anybody ever said that to you in your organization? I wanted to argue back, but I just had to pause because look, if I was really being honest with myself in that particular organization, he was right. We had spent months, years auditing different areas within the company, writing up report after report about what was wrong. But had we actually helped the company grow? Had we ever provided any insights beyond "you need better controls" or "this is not in compliance"? Now, at this point, he must have sensed that I was having an identity crisis because he smirked and said, "The next time you audit one of my departments, don't just tell me what's broken, tell me how to make it better." Now, that was a wake up call. You see, we aren't failing at compliance, we're good at that. But we are failing at connection. Let me say that again. We are not failing at compliance, but we are failing at connection. And that moment set me on a journey to figure out, are we focused too much on compliance and not enough with being true business partners? Now, if you can relate to this, drop a thumbs up in the chat. Let me know if you can relate to this, being at an organization where you're just kind of seen as the people who point out what's wrong. You see, the biggest problem is compliance is structured and clear. 1 + 1 = 2 most of the time. But business strategy is not that simple. And auditors, we're mostly trained on rules and regulations, not on forward thinking and advisory. Not on forward thinking and advisory. That's a huge problem that a lot of us face nowadays. And I'll tell you what, if you want a long-lasting career in audit, we've got to move out of being the checkbox compliance auditors into the business strategy partners, not just in our own minds, but we have to convince our clients that that is a service that we can offer them and that we are willing to offer them. I was once a part of an audit department where about 90% of our work was checking policies. No business risk, no strategic insights, just checklist after checklist. We were knee deep in "does this comply?" while the company was making major operational changes that we weren't even looking at. One day in a meeting, I remember asking, "Why aren't we auditing the business strategy? Because it's clearly messed up." More on that in just a minute. But the audit manager looked at me and he just kind of suggested, or he looked at me like I had just suggested setting the work papers on fire. He said to me, and I'll never forget this, he said, "Because compliance is black and white and strategy is messy, and we don't get paid to be messy." Think about that. He said to me, "Because compliance is black and white, strategy is messy, and we don't get paid to be messy." That's insane. Anybody else ever had that type of an experience? Because auditors, be honest. Do you feel more comfortable testing policies than discussing strategy? Do you feel more comfortable testing policies than discussing strategy? Because hold on tight. I'm going to tell you a story about one time I discussed strategy. Actually, a couple of stories about when I discussed strategy. And it made some people very happy and it made some people very, very mad. But just hold on tight. Okay, so now this brings us to the first reason why auditors are just too much into compliance and not enough into business strategy. Our first reason is that compliance is comfortable, strategy is riskier. Compliance is comfortable, strategy is riskier. Now, I know what you're thinking. I can sit here on a podcast and talk about this and point out the problems just like auditors do and not bring any solutions. But let's talk solutions. What are some small steps that we can take to stop being stuck in the compliance bubble and start thinking about, talking about, and being about strategy with our audit clients? So the first thing we can do is start asking why more often. Why is this process like this? Why is this control like this? Oftentimes we go in guns blazing. This is wrong. But we don't ask why. We also don't ask, how does this impact the success of the department, the organization, the process? These simple questions open up a world of opportunity and a world of conversation with our audit clients. Now, here's something else you can do. Push for balance in audit planning. Now, some of you aren't in positions of authority to be able to do this. But for those of you who are, when you see that audit plan and it's just a compliance checklist, start pushing for more balance in that audit plan. And Shree's got it. Really question to start asking why. Yeah. Why is this happening like this? And so Hubert is here, and Hubert says compliance versus strategy, compliance versus agile oh boy. Ooh. Yeah, agile operations. It's not just for our clients. Audit departments should be, well, agile in the way we operate too, but that's a whole nother podcast for a different day, right? Okay, so one reason auditors are stuck in the compliance checkbox era is because compliance is comfortable, strategy is riskier. We need to start asking why more often. We need to push for balance in our audit plan. And the next thing is we need to get comfortable with ambiguity. You see, our audit clients are balancing risk all day, every day. And then here we come with our checklist. You should just do this. But what if they don't have enough resources to do it? What if they don't have enough knowledge to do it? What if they don't have enough time to do it? They have to think in a world of gray. And here we come with our black and white. All you have to do is, I'm always leery of people who say all you have to do, because if that's all I had to do, then instead of pointing it out to me, why don't you just help me do it? So we have to get comfortable with ambiguity because the world is full of ambiguity. Ooh, I don't know if I agree with this, Hubert. Previously, audit had its weight. Nowadays, you feel compliance is taking much more weight. I don't know. Or wait a minute. Are you making a statement or asking me a question? I think you're asking me a question. If you're asking my opinion, I think it really depends. I think that audit and compliance really should be joined at the hip. They should be working together because all of us should be working towards the betterment of the organization. And so when I see audit and compliance departments that are so siloed, it makes me sad because we aren't in competition here. So that's just my take on it. Did you know, though, that according to a Deloitte internal audit report, executives only involve audit in decision making about 30% of the time compared to legal or finance or other departments. Now, that's what I think is sad. I once overheard a CFO venting in the break room, and he was talking to the COO, and he said, and this is what he said now. He said, audit is great at telling me what's wrong, but when's the last time they told me how to make money? Ooh. Audit is great at telling me what's wrong, but when's the last time they told me how to make money? Now, Hubert just responded back. He said, yes, that was a question. Okay, so let me go ahead. I think I addressed it, but let me just reiterate. I don't think compliance has more weight, or at least it shouldn't. In some organizations, it does, especially heavily regulated organizations where one fine from a regulator could literally put you out of business. But again, I still think that's a losing proposition because compliance is literally, did we comply, yes or no? Now, suppose we didn't comply with something, but it was because it was an operational nightmare to execute. That's where audit can come in as the advisor and help to streamline the processes. So, in some organizations, yeah, compliance does overshadow audit, but I think that's a losing proposition for the organization. Ooh, that's another good question, Herbert. Do I think the CAE should sit on the board? Well, okay, nah, I don't think the CAE should sit on the board. Do you mean, how do you mean? Because if you look at the organization, the CAE should report to the board via the audit committee, right? So I don't think you should sit on the board. You are the auditor for the organization. Now, the board represents the stakeholders, so there should be some reporting relationship. Now, I don't know if you're also asking, do I think CAEs should sit on boards of other companies? If that's the question you're asking, I think the best board members would be CAEs and former CAEs. But if you're asking, should they sit on the board of the company that they work for? No, I don't, that's not appropriate. That's not an appropriate line to have. But yeah. Oh, now who is this? This is Facile. Internal audit and compliance are playing great advisory roles in developing strategic, productive business strategies. In some organizations that are forward thinking, but you'd be surprised how many audit departments are still behind the times. This is where they should be. I do agree with that. This is the perfect alignment of where audit departments should be, but you'd be surprised how many aren't there. You would be very surprised. Okay. Hubert, this is a really good conversation you're having. As a consultative service, should CAEs sit on boards? And I'm guessing you mean in other companies, not the ones that they work for. If that's what you mean, absolutely we should be. Again, we would make fantastic board members. But the whole board seat game is one where, anyway, that's a whole nother podcast topic. A whole nother podcast topic. But yeah. Okay, so now think about this though. I overheard a CFO saying audit is great at telling me what's wrong, but when's the last time they told me how to make money? So let me ask you all, has a business leader ever asked you for input on a major decision? Give me a thumbs up if they have. Give me a thumbs down if they haven't. I'll tell you a story in my career. It was very interesting. So I was a chief auditor and I was over auditing a university and healthcare operations. We had hospitals, physician clinics, cancer research facilities. And we got a call one time from our audiology hearing clinic. And we went in and we started taking a look at operations. And so for those of you outside of the US, the way healthcare typically works in the US, you go to a healthcare provider. They provide you with a service. That service is tied to a code. You then put in that code, and that is how you bill the insurance company. Well, the government, if the government is handling the healthcare claim, there's certain codes that they don't reimburse you for. They call them zero codes. They still want you to use those codes because what they're doing is tracking how many people get that particular service. And at some point, they might start reimbursing and paying for that service. We had one of those procedures that our doctors were performing. It was a zero code. They didn't pay any money for it. Therefore, we weren't entering it into the system, which was a huge mistake because at some point, the government had started reimbursing for it. And since we weren't putting it in the system, we weren't billing for it. Therefore, we weren't collecting revenue for it. My team found this and ended up finding money that the department was actually missing. Now, here's where it got interesting. When we showed them this and told them this, they started billing for the service, and they told us that they were actually thinking about closing the clinic because it was losing money, until we found out that they should not have been losing money. They just simply weren't billing for all of the services that were performed. This is the sweet spot for audit, when you can actually help make money, recoup money, drive business strategy. Not necessarily drive it, but have an advisory role into business strategy? And I see a bunch of yeses in the chat. So some of you have had the experience where you have helped organizations out. Aha. Now here's an excellent comment. Review of business strategy needs management support and request, I feel. You are correct at that. Audit cannot just review strategy unless audit has its homework done. You are correct at that too. We're going to get to that part in just a few minutes. As to think about this though. If management is not requesting it, why? It probably is because they feel like you have not done your homework. We'll get to that in just one moment though. Okay. So now let's talk about the next reason why auditors are stuck in the compliance bubble and are not seen as business advisors. Simple. Business leaders see us as rule enforcers. They don't see us as advisors. We don't behave like advisors. We behave like enforcers. Every time we find an issue, the first thing we say is, according to rule number ABC. So, how can we actually get over that? First, we have to reframe how we communicate risk. Instead of saying to them, this is a violation, we can say things like, here's how fixing this can create value for the organization. You see how different it sounds just in the wording. But the other thing we can do is develop our own strategic mindset. So many of us are stuck in the compliance bubble. We don't even think strategically. Let me tell you another story. But before I do, if you like this podcast, tell your friends. If you like this style and delivery of storytelling, along with some lessons, along with some audience interaction, you need to book that audit guy for training for your local IIA chapter or for your organization, especially if you have a large organization with a bunch of auditors and you need to get in those 40 hours of training. I can provide you with everything that you need, including your ethics training. All right, so let's pause and recap for a minute. What do you think? Is audit stuck in compliance mode, or do we have a real seat at the strategy table? If you think we have a seat at the strategy table right now, drop strategy into the chat. If you think that we have a real seat at the strategy table. If you think that we're trying and we're getting there, type trying into the chat. I think we're all kind of just trying. And it depends on the organization too, right? Some organizations are ready for it. Other organizations are not ready for it. Now, Marsha is saying strategy. Hey, she's in the strategy. Clarence agrees with me. He said that is a true statement. And Shri says she likes this style. She likes the interaction here. All right. So tell all your friends. Now, while I have your time and attention, let's talk about another topic that's trending with auditors nowadays. We're all talking about artificial intelligence, right? Whether it's how to audit it or how to use it to make our auditing processes better. Well, guess what? I created Audit Leverage, which is the first AI-powered tool designed specifically for internal auditors. There are 5 powerful modules with 15 tools. Audit Leverage helps you leverage, get it, artificial intelligence for better outcomes. You can do things like create a risk matrix in minutes, not hours or months. You can practice handling client objections to audit issues. You can even ask it questions about the standards and get useful, practical answers. If that sounds interesting to you, go to auditleverage.net. Auditleverage.net. Got it? Hubert, does what count for CPE? This podcast does not count right now. But if you all bring me into your organization or your IIA chapter, yeah, I give you nice CPE certificates that say the name of the training, the date of the training, and then it says, hey, training by that audit guy, right? Oh, we've got somebody else, thumbs up, that's invited to the strategy table. That's Facile. Awesome. Awesome. Very, very awesome. Okay, Shri is saying she doesn't have any friends. That is not true. Not true at all. Of course, it's an AI engine. Go check it out. Go check it out. Of course, it's an AI engine. Okay, so listen, let's get back to our regularly scheduled program. Look, a few years ago, and when I say a few, I mean many years ago, I've been doing this for almost 3 decades now. God, that sounds, I'm kind of old, right? See the gray hair? But I was a part of an audit team that I remember we had just wrapped up a review of an operations department. We had gone through everything: controls, processes, risk, and guess what? We found almost nothing. And for me, I was like, yeah, cool. You think that that would be a good thing? I mean, clean operations means strong controls. Isn't that a win? I think that's a win. But when we presented our audit report in a team meeting, the manager looked disappointed. And she actually said, if we don't find anything, did we even do our jobs? And I was like, wait a minute, what? What?
How dare you?
That's insane. I had to sit there for a second and let that process in my head, because shouldn't success mean that things are working well? And shouldn't an audit report that's clean actually say that this department is well managed based on the scope of the things that we looked at? And shouldn't that be just as good as an audit report where we actually found issues? And here's why I say this. I always say we are called assurance providers, right? So we give reasonable assurance of one of a few things. Either A, things are operating as intended; B, things aren't operating as intended and are just blowing up; or C, things are kind of operating as intended with a few minor tweaks. They could be operating a little bit better, right? So isn't that the assurance that we provide? It's not that we provide assurance that everything is messed up and we're here to help fix it, because only we can tell you what's wrong. So I was a little baffled by this, you know. So back then we were still operating in the old school mindset that success in audit means having a lot of issues. But then again, isn't that kind of how we measure our success sometimes? Number of issues opened and closed. So let me ask you all a question. Do you ever feel the pressure to find something? That's the absolute wrong way to audit. But do you ever feel the pressure to always find something? If you feel the pressure to always find something, type pressure into the chat for me. I'm just curious to see if anybody else has ever felt that way before. Ooh, Rebecca. Yep, there you go. Strategy does not have to be at the C-suite level only. There you go. There you go. You can find strategy in every area of the business and run with it. Now, I'm going to tell you a real cool strategy story in a minute. Let me check my notes to see if this is the place for it or is it later on. Let me see. No, this isn't the place for it yet. But you're going to hear a real cool strategy story. Oh, Clarence says many bosses have, directors hate a report like that. So directors you've worked for or seen, Clarence, have hated clean reports. I just think that that's asinine. Like that is insane to me that you would hate a clean report. And Hubert says clean report may happen in a small organization. It can happen in large organizations too. It actually depends. I see you've said it depends on the size of the organization. I disagree with that. Whether you have a clean report or not depends on the culture of the organization. It has nothing to do with size. It has everything to do with culture. Culture is one of the most important elements that determines the success or failure of an organization. So if that's what you were linking it to in this comment, I totally disagree with that. Respectfully disagree with that. Here's another good comment. I think the problem is we are expected to raise findings even when there is nothing to raise. That is the exact problem. But again, the reason this problem exists is because the culture within our audit department has been trained like that. This is a bad precedent to set. This is a horrible way to think as an auditor. Because again, as assurance providers, we can provide assurance that things are operating as intended based on the scope of the things that we looked at, right? Who is this? Is this Facile again? We are asked to scrutinize the client, identify gaps, and recommend actionable measures. Really? No, we're asked to assess the controls that are in place to determine if they are operating appropriately or if they are not. We're not necessarily there to make sure that something is wrong. We're there to assess if something is wrong. Those are two different things, right? One is a witch hunt. The other is a question, an inquiry. So, and maybe it's just wording because you say we are asked to scrutinize. We're not asked to scrutinize. We're asked to assess. Those are two different things. Two different things altogether. Yes, they absolutely may know something that we don't. Yeah, that happens all the time. They always know something that we don't. They're closer to it than we are. I agree with that wholeheartedly, Rebecca. Agree with that wholeheartedly. Okay. So that brings us to our next reason why we are stuck in the compliance bubble. We oftentimes measure the findings that we have, not value creation. So how can we fix that? One thing we can do is change how success is measured for an audit department. Change how success is measured. The next thing we can do is highlight financial and operational wins. There are wins everywhere. If we're there to provide reasonable assurance, doesn't that mean pointing out wins as well? The other thing we can do is celebrate strong controls, not just weaknesses. If we go in and audit a department and we notice that they have strong controls, why would our report not reflect that? Again, we are assurance providers. We're providing reasonable assurance that things are either A, operating as intended, or B, not operating as intended. And if they are operating as intended, we should be able to say that without the pressure to always find something wrong. Ooh, another good question. Would auditing culture be sufficient? Absolutely. But here's an even better thing to do. We should embed elements of culture auditing into every audit engagement that we do. Because here's the deal. If you think about your average organization, there's a culture that comes from the top, right? But every department has its own subculture too. You ever work for an organization where you liked most of the people in the organization? It was a great place to work, but it was this one department that was the trouble department that everybody hated. So if you just audited culture at the high level, you'd miss out on this one department that was the problem child. And most issues that we have in organizations are culture related issues. I know that's hard to hear, but it's the truth. So let me tell you another story. According to the Harvard Business Review, about 60% of business professionals don't receive formal business training. Now, isn't that shocking? That's just shocking, right? I remember sitting in an internal audit training session when one of the senior auditors, let's call him Mike, he raised his hand and he said something that made me do a double take. Check this out, you guys. He said, "We're here discussing the importance of understanding the company's business model." And Mike, with complete confidence, said, "I don't need to understand the business. My job is risk." So we were sitting there discussing the business model, the strategy, and how the organization operated. And Mike said, "I don't need to understand the business. My job is risk." Oh boy, that's insane. That is insane. Now let's break this down. Imagine you're a doctor, but you say something like, "I don't need to understand human anatomy. My job is just diagnosing symptoms." That doesn't work, right? And yet so many auditors operate this way. We want to assess risk, but we don't want to take the time to understand how the business actually makes its money, or how operations function, or what the company's long-term goals are. Now I'm going to tell you guys a real personal story right now. This one is hard to tell. And so years ago, I worked for a grocery retail chain. We were a Fortune 500 organization. And when I say years ago, I mean in the mid 90s. That's a long time ago, right? We were a Fortune 500 retail grocery chain. We were about $24 billion in revenue. And we had your standard cookie cutter grocery stores where we sold everything to everyone, basic generic products. We were in some markets that were heavily dominated by Hispanic culture. And what we would do is we would go out and we would audit some of the stores. Then we would audit the manufacturing facilities. Then we would audit the regional accounting facilities as well. So I'll never forget this. One day I'm sitting in Miami, Florida, and we're auditing a store. And one of the store managers came up to me and decided to have a heart-to-heart with me. And the store manager said, listen, we've got a problem with sales in this store and in all the stores in Florida. And I was like, really? What's the problem? He said that the problem was they didn't sell enough Hispanic grocery items, heavily dominated by Hispanic culture, Spanish-speaking culture. They didn't have enough grocery items. So I'm thinking, ooh, you make a really good point. Because if you've ever been to Miami, you will notice there are a lot of Cubans, a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of people of Hispanic descent in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area. So I said, okay, let me take this back to corporate headquarters. So I go back to corporate headquarters and I'm thinking, this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about strategy and what we're doing. Because when we ran the numbers, we did see that same store sales were decreasing, not in just this location, but in many of the locations in Florida and in Texas. So I go back and I talk to one of the buyers and I say, listen, the stores are directly talking to us as auditors, and they're saying that we need to sell more Hispanic items, right? It just kind of makes sense. And the response I got was shocking, and I'll never forget it. And I'll never forget the aftermath of what started happening after that. Someone looked at me dead in my face and said, if they want their kind of food, then they should shop at their stores. I was shocked. Now, let me just tell you what ended up happening years down the line. We had 1,200 retail locations, $24 billion organization. The number of stores we had that were operating cut in half. Well, I was gone by the time all this happened because I saw the writing on the wall. The number of stores cut in half. The actual revenue cut in half. I think the organization filed for bankruptcy once and I think maybe twice. Strategy was off. As auditors, we were trying to help with strategy, but we were met with resistance. Why were we met with resistance? Because our department as a whole was not viewed as one that could do value creation. So even if you are a smart person and you kind of get it, if the company does not value you as a resource, it won't work. It will not work. Now, Abdul, you have made a very good point, my friend. I'm going to put your comment up. The entire comment probably is not going to show on the screen, but I can see a majority of the comment. But Abdul says the success of an audit depends on both controllable and uncontrollable factors. Controllable factors include the auditor's competence, absolutely, proper audit planning, quality of procedures, independence, internal quality control, use of technology, and professional skepticism. These elements are within the auditor's or the firm's influence and can be optimized to ensure a thorough and reliable audit. On the other hand, uncontrollable factors such as the client's internal controls and cooperation, regulations, and then I cannot see the rest. But absolutely, there are certain things that you can control, certain things that you cannot control. But here's what I will tell you. Most of the time we get pushback because we're not valued by the organization. And most times we're not valued because we've not brought anything in their minds that add value. Sometimes it's a perception issue, and sometimes it's some of the controllable factors you've mentioned. I remember I inherited one audit department where the auditors didn't know enough about the organization's operations to actually audit. So I immediately sent them to training. That part was controllable by me as the chief audit executive. But let's get into reason number 4 that auditors are kind of stuck in the compliance bubble. Reason number 4 is internal audit teams often lack business acumen. So you must have been reading my mind, Abdul, because you kind of hit the point. Look, I'll just be honest with you. A lot of us as auditors, we understand risk and controls, but we don't understand how a business operates. As an entrepreneur, I truly understand what it means to take a calculated risk. You may not be able to put the most ideal control in place, but you can put the one that works right now based on the resources that you have. And sometimes we become too pushy as auditors without understanding the underlying risk within the client's operating environment. So let's talk about some practical ways that we can overcome this. Learn the business, not just the risk. Learn the business and how the business actually operates. Controls in a startup are going to be different from the controls in a multi-billion-dollar organization. You would hope that they be better in the multi-billion-dollar organization, but that's not always true, right? So what I'd say is schedule some time with operational leaders. Go talk to them. One of the best things that I'd ever done was I've actually been to training with some of my audit clients. And I don't mean audit training. I mean training on what it is that they do. That's an experience unlike anything I've ever done and seen before. And then when I did it with one client, he told other clients and they started inviting me to their conferences. We spend a lot of our time going to audit conferences. Let me ask, how many of you have ever gone to a trade conference that had nothing to do with audit at all, but it had something to do with the industry that you were in? Ask some of your clients what conferences they go to and go to some of those conferences with them. It was the most enlightening experience I had ever had. The first time I did it was about 20 years ago. And it was just an amazing experience. Not to mention it brought me closer to the client because, after the conference each day, we go to dinner and we talk. And, instead of viewing us as aliens from another planet, they viewed us as human, or at least they viewed me as human. So, okay. Lack of business acumen is one problem that we have. We need to learn the business, not just the risk. We also need to just take some business strategy courses. I just told you guys about the SaaS company I just launched, Audit Leverage, the first and best AI platform for internal auditors. You think just knowing audit helped me launch that company? No. I had to truly understand how business operates. I had to develop a strategy. We're getting clients already using the platform. I had to take risk. I had to have some weak controls until I could put stronger controls in place. But the third thing you can do is start thinking like an executive. Start thinking like an executive. David O'Brien is here. David says, great points. Part of the challenge we have in raising value add strategy points, particularly in the field of audit, is that those points are often viewed as criticism of the client, and the resistance is based on that. Obviously, yeah, right. But here's the thing. I had a client say something to me that was the most impactful thing that I had ever heard. We had just delivered what I would deem to be the absolute worst audit we had ever done. Everything we looked at was really, really bad. But at the end of the audit, he said something that initially hurt my feelings. And I thought we were friends. He looked at me and he said, I absolutely hate what you do. And my heart just kind of sank. I was like, oh. And he saw the look on my face because I thought we had a really good relationship. And then he turned and he looked at me and he said, but I actually like how you do it. And so what I did was I asked him for some feedback. How am I doing what I do to where you view this criticism as being constructive and not destructive? And that actually became the genesis of my best-selling book, Ask Better Questions, Get Better Answers, Perform Better Audits. But to boil it down, In a few points, I treated them like they were human. I acted like I had a stake in the success of their department. And it wasn't even an act. I felt like I had a stake in the success or failure of their department. And there are a bunch of other things that I did. So, but also, if you're dealing with mature people, they act maturely. And that's on both sides. Like we have to deliver our criticism, quote unquote, in a constructive way. And I'll add to that, we have to use what I call the two C's. We have to be caring and constructive. It's one thing to be constructive, but when people think you don't give a damn, they're going to respond as such. Think about it. Well, what do you do with your children? You try to give them caring, constructive criticism. When they're younger, they don't get it. As they get older, most times they come back and apologize to you for being such pains in the butt when they were younger. It's the same concept. Most people want to be accepted. Most people want to be thought of as helpful and useful, whether we're children or whether we're adults. And if you can give people that feeling by being genuine when you communicate with them, it's a win-win. Now, I will say there is that small, 5% of the world that's, mentally deranged, narcissistic, and all that other good stuff. But that's only like 5%. It's somewhere the number is like 2 to 5%. So that means most of your clients aren't going to be crazy. Most of them are going to be rational and reasonable if we know how to talk to them. Now, let me tell you about a time I rewrote an entire audit report, not because the findings were wrong, but because the tone that we had used in the report was completely unhelpful. So we were reviewing one department that had a few inefficiencies, nothing major. There were a few things that could be improved, but overall, it wasn't too bad. The original audit report, though, it read like a list of crimes. It was all like, this control is deficient. This process does not meet best practices. Failure to remediate could result in negative blah, 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 blah. So I looked at the report and I thought, who in their right mind would want to read this when in the grand scheme of things, it really wasn't, that bad. If I were a department head receiving that report, I wouldn't feel motivated to improve. I would feel attacked. So I rewrote it and I reframed a lot of it. And instead of that whole language about this is a violation, it was more like, here's how this process can be improved. Here's an opportunity to increase efficiency and reduce risk. It's all in the language. These improvements can help the department save X number of hours per week. Yes, we went in and actually calculated time savings, cost savings. Now, when they got the report, not only did they read it, they acted on it. And let me just say, it wasn't just the report that reflected this. We embodied this spirit throughout the entire process and throughout our conversations with them, which is why the report, when we drafted it, I could see it was a clear difference from how we were talking to them and treating them during the engagement. And that's what we do a lot. During the audit engagements, it's like, hey, this is pretty well run. You guys are doing commendable. And then all of a sudden, it's that slap in the face. Could you imagine being in school and you're sitting there and you get your weekly updates from the teacher and you think that you're going to have an A at the end of the 6 weeks on your report card, and then all of a sudden you get an F? That's what clients feel like when we aren't congruent in how we speak to them during the audit versus when they get the final report. I know one of my friends told me I'm just full of analogies, and I get it. But I think people relate to others better through analogy. Oh, now this is actually a really good question. Hubert, you ask really good questions. And you gotta understand too, when I give my opinion, this is just my opinion, which means it could be wrong. Most of the time it's right though. But if it is wrong, I'll probably go back and say, hey, you know what? I had to rethink that. But so he says, audit wise, where could you place the audit mission to be more agile, less time consuming for operational teams? Look, here's the thing. What do you think the mission of an audit department is? because I have my idea of what I think a mission is. I think every audit department's mission should be to provide the stakeholders with reasonable assurance that controls either A, operate as intended, or B, do not operate as intended. I don't care what industry you work in, what company you work for. Our job is to provide stakeholders with reasonable assurance. Now, with that said, you're getting into how we provide that assurance, and that varies depending on the leadership of the audit team. I think that if we are to be good stewards of the resources we've been given, and by resources, I mean the budget to actually pay people and to buy audit management systems and to buy Audit Leverage, the best AI system for auditors. If we are to be good stewards of our resources, then we should try to do risk-based audits. We should try to have agile auditing techniques in place so that we can be good stewards of the resources that have been entrusted to us. And hopefully that was, what you were kind of looking for. But again, it's just my opinion. Some people may have a different opinion. Good for them. But but that is my opinion, and I happen to believe in it and stand by it. Okay, so now let's get to I think this is our last reason. I think reason number 5, auditors are stuck in that compliance bubble. Audit reports focus on problems, not opportunities. Now, I'm not saying that there won't be problems, but what I'm saying is, if you saw point number 3, I believe it was, we always have to find something. Really? There's not always something wrong. Right? How do we deal with that? Reframe findings as improvements. Speak in business terms, not just audit jargon, and write reports for impact. Now, Hubert, you're asking another really good question. Here's the deal. You asked, are they shareholders, potential investors, internal teams? I didn't say shareholders. I said stakeholders. Stakeholders could be anyone that relies on our product for almost anything. Let me give you an example. I spent, about 15 years as chief auditor in higher education. You want to know who my stakeholders were? My stakeholders were, number 1, the parents who sent their children to the school and put them in our care. Number 2, the professors who worked at the school. Number 3, the taxpayers whose money we received from the federal government and from the state government. Number 4, the donors who donated money to the organization. Number 5, the employees. Our stakeholders are anyone who has a vested interest in what it is that we are doing. It's not just shareholders. I'm not saying that you said that, right? I'm just saying a lot of people believe that the stakeholders are the shareholders. Really? Because our shareholders only want one thing. They want a return on the investment they've made. And sometimes we do awful things trying to give that return on that investment, right? But say if you're in a hospital network and you're a hospital auditor, aren't your patients your stakeholders too? They aren't your shareholders, but they are your stakeholders. They want to make sure that the processes operate effectively too. I remember when I was a chief auditor in the healthcare setting, we'd look at things like medical devices, right? Because making sure the wireless network they ran on was secure. Why? Because we didn't want to kill patients, because they are our stakeholders. So anyway, to me, there's just a whole difference between shareholders and stakeholders. And we operate on behalf of the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. Now, shareholders happen to be a part of our stakeholder group, but we operate on behalf of our stakeholders. Listen, if you are enjoying this podcast, go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go to Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can download and share this podcast with your friends. So let's recap really, really quickly. So today, I just asked the question, are auditors too much about compliance and not enough about business strategy? We talked about how audit can, level up and become a real strategic force. First thing, compliance is important, but it's not enough. Second, business leaders won't see audit as advisors until we act like advisors. Stop doing those checklist audits. We need to shift from finding problems to driving improvements. And then understanding business strategy isn't optional. It is 100% essential. So let me ask you, do we need to change how we operate? What's one thing we can do to shift audit more towards strategy? Let's talk about it. I welcome your comments, concerns, questions. Not necessarily, Hubert. Not necessarily. I worked for some organizations that were public organizations and the audit reports were published publicly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be. Like if I'm a private company, I'm not going to publish my audit reports publicly. I'm just not. But that still doesn't take away from the fact that some of my shareholders are people that will never see the audit. Stakeholders are people that will never see the audit reports. Right? I mean, I think you are like a stakeholder in the apartment building that you live in, but you don't see their financial reports, right? You are a stakeholder in the hospital that you go to, but you may not ever see their financial reports if it's a private hospital. So, Hubert asked, do I have a blog? Hubert, you know what? I do. I'm actually redesigning my website right now, though. And I think I'm going to take everything off of the blog and just start over. But if you want to sign up for my mailing list, you can go to thatauditguy.com. A lot of new content coming soon. I'm just revamping a lot of stuff. But you can follow me on LinkedIn as well. I post something related to audit and life almost 5 to 6 days per week. And then this podcast is bi-weekly. And then on Fridays, you can check out the Friday Fraudster. What we do is we take stories that are in the news right now, frauds that have happened, and we talk about them in an entertaining and educational way. What went wrong? How could it have been prevented? Sometimes we add a little comedy to it because talking about doom and gloom stuff all the time is kind of sad, right? It's kind of sad. Yeah. Some central banks do publish publicly, and it does give a lot of confidence. But I mean, again, if I'm a private company, I wouldn't want to do that. But I've worked for organizations where my audit reports were out on the internet for all to see. That's when I had to learn the art of actually writing with impact, communicating with impact. So, Audit Bites, episode number 72. Is internal audit too focused on compliance and not enough on business strategy? Now here's the deal. Some people are going to answer that and say, I know in my audit department, we focus a lot on business strategy. Okay, I'm not talking about you individually. I'm talking about collectively in our profession. And if I were to answer this collectively, I would say, yes, we are too focused on compliance and not enough on business strategy. Now, if I talk about me personally, I focus on strategy quite a bit. So anyway, thank you for joining me on this episode of Audit Bites. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for watching this episode of Audit Bites. If you receive value from this podcast, do us a favor. First, tell other auditors. Second, give us a 5-star review. And finally, talk to Robert about training your auditors. Our contact information is on our website, www.thatauditguy.com. It's also where you will find our course catalog, on-demand courses, a kick-butt blog, other podcasts, Robert's best-selling books, and last but not least, audit merch. That's right, we have audit hats, shirts, mugs, and more. Thanks for watching and listening. See you next episode.